It doesn't have to be complicated, like building muscle and building strength. It really, the main thing that you need to know is your muscles. You don't need to know like every single muscle, but you do need to know your major muscle groups if you want to train effectively. The major muscle groups are the quads and your leggies. Their job is they extend your knee. The opposing muscle group that does the opposite of that is hamstrings in the back of your leg. They flex your knee. So these two muscles, quadriceps extension, hamstring flexion of the knee. So if you want to grow these muscles, you need to add resistance to their job. So for quadriceps, you need to make it harder for them to flex or extend your knee. For the hamstrings, you need to make it harder for them to flex the knee. That is the principle of training, right? So you want to know your major muscles and what they do, and then just do different exercises that add resistance to that. So you've got your quads, you've got your hamstrings, generally we just say calves for down here. It's technically two muscles, soleus and gastrocnemius, but you can just say calves. And together they work to point the toes, right? Ankle plantar flexion. You also have a muscle along the front here called anterior tibialis. You don't need to know that, but I think it's a fun one to know. And I think it's good to know, especially if you're a runner or you do any kind of sport where you run, because that muscle is probably gonna get tired and tight and can cause shin splints. It does, bringing your toes up, dorsiflexion. So those are the major muscles in your legs. You can also include the glutes muscles in your legs. So your glutes are your butt muscles. They take your legs back, they take your leg out, they rotate your legs, okay? So there's three glute muscles, but generally you know that the glutes are in the butt, okay? For the leggies, for the glutes and the leggy muscles, the best exercises to grow those and target those are gonna be your compound exercises, squats, deadlifts, and the variations of squats and deadlifts, lunges, step-ups, okay? These are all great exercises. And then you can use machines, leg extension machines where you have a little thing here and you extend your leg against the resistance, or all the other machines that you can find. So that's the leggies. And then upper body is a little bit more complicated, honestly. So for your arms, you've got your biceps and your triceps. They manipulate your elbow joint, kind of like your quads and your hamstrings, your knee. So biceps, elbow flexion, triceps, elbow extension. So if you want to grow your biceps, you need to add resistance to elbow flexion. If you want to grow your triceps, you need to add resistance to elbow extension. So you can use dumbbells for that. You can use bands, you can use machines. Just do something that makes it harder for your elbow joint to move in either direction. Your shoulders, they're a little complicated. In general, there's three major directions that your shoulder muscles have you go. There's out, right here, so that would be more like lateral delts, forward and back, or back like that. All three movements are important. So you want to add resistance to all of those movements. And then, let's see if I can, back, the main important muscle group of your back, I would say, is the lats. Lats bring your arms in. They do kind of like the opposite of your shoulders. They bring your arms in from multiple directions. So anytime you're adding resistance to pulling your arms down back to the center line, that's lats work. And the lats have to work. They're helper muscles in almost every single exercise that you do. Squats, bench, pull-ups, they're the prime mover, the pull-ups, but you always have to have your lats somewhat fired up to keep your posture upright, right? And the erector spinae muscle as well. We'll get to the core in a second. But those two are I would say the main important muscles in terms of major muscle groups in your back. You have your traps as well. And honestly, I feel like most people don't really need to work the traps in isolation. This may be controversial for some people, but because we spend so much time with our shoulders up and rounded forward, I feel like our traps get a lot of activation. And so I personally don't do any exercises for myself specifically to shrug to grow my traps. And you guys have seen my traps. My traps are huge. And I don't really do anything for them. But the traps manipulate the shoulders, bring them up or squeeze the shoulder blades together in the back. They also do that. So anytime that you're having to do that, you're gonna be engaging the traps. But like I said, I don't really do a whole lot of work for those guys. And then your core, really important, especially if you're just starting out with resistance training or you're just starting to exercise, your core is probably weak if you don't exercise or move around a lot. And it is important to have a strong core to keep your posture right when you're adding, weight or carrying weight and doing other exercises. So you really want to put a lot of emphasis on your core, especially in the beginning of your training. And 3 major muscle groups that I usually design core programming around is abdominals, okay? The abdominals, they run along the front of your belly. They crunch, they do crunches. That's called spinal flexion, okay? They do spinal flexion. So anytime you're doing crunches while you're laying on the floor, you can do like standing and grab like a band and crunch against resistance like that. Doing something that makes it harder for those muscles to do their job, add resistance to make them stronger. So it's abdominals, and then you also have your obliques. Your obliques, you have external and internal ones. They do 2 different types of movements. There's like bending and extending the torso this way, right? And then there's twisting. So anytime that you're adding like resistance to bending or adding resistance to twisting, that's working your obliques, really important muscle to be strong. And then finally, I mentioned before your erector spinae in your back. That's a muscle that runs all along your spine. It literally means the spine holder upper in Latin, the erector spinae. Its whole job is to pull your spine upright. So the abs, they flex your spine, right? The erector spinae extends your spine with help from the lats and the traps as well. If you want a good solid core, you need to hit all 3 of those muscle groups when you're doing your core work. Exercises for the erector spinae include, I like to do swimmers, bird dogs, Supermans. If you want to use a weight, if you have a Roman chair in your gym, Roman chairs are awesome. You can do them with no weight. You can do them with a little bit of weight. Or I've figured out how to use my incline bench at a decline to get that movement as well. So those are your major muscle groups that you really want to know. Did I miss any? I don't think I did. You want to get familiar with what it feels like when that muscle is firing up. So if you're doing an exercise for your quadriceps, you need to have your mind focused on those muscles. Feel what it feels like for that muscle to contract as it gets tired. Feel what it feels like when you stretch that muscle, and just become very intimately familiar with what it feels like when different muscles are fired up. Because the more that you can connect your mind to your muscles while you're training, the safer your training is going to be. It's going to be easier for you to keep good technique. Because later on when you go to add more complicated movements, or if you try to lift heavy, like in powerlifting or strongman, you're going to need to have that mind-muscle connection to know when your lats are fired up or if they're not fired up. If your coach says, fire up your lats, you need to be able to do that isometrically without actually moving your body. So that's how you build that awareness. And that's why I say bodybuilding is the foundation of powerlifting. It's the foundation to any competitive type of lifting because it's where you learn your muscles. Bodybuilding will teach you what it feels like to work the muscles in isolation so that you can understand how to fire them up and what it feels like to fire them up and know when they're not firing up in your heavy lifts. So that's what I say. Know your muscles.